All right, so here we'll move forward with talking about the United States, what's happening as far as its um, development, you might say, as it begins to grapple with many of the kinds of themes that we've been covering thus far. The century itself in the United States is really kind of the two sides of the same coin, you might say. You're going to see the United States begin to transform itself from a largely kind of agrarian state into more of an industrial state and an industrial economy. Uh, from the beginning of the century to this industrial state by the end of the century. It's also going to obviously go from being a slave owning society in the beginning of the 19th century to a free society, as far as kind of legal concepts are concerned, by the end of the century. It will go also from being a near one party dominant type of state under the kind of organization of Democratic Republicans, which was a one party led by Thomas Jefferson and his allies, to and that's early. That's at the dawn really of the 19th century. To by the 1890s, the United States would have a major third party in its existing within its political spectrum that also held a rather potent national presence. So again, just to expand upon this political dynamic here, in the 1810s, the Democratic Republican Party enjoyed near complete dominance. That from Thomas Jefferson through to James Monroe, you're going to have this. They'll those presidents and those presidents in between those two are going to be uh, of this one party. By the 1890s, you have the rise of the Populist or People's Party. This is an alliance of organized factory workers and farmers. Again, very characteristic of what we just talked about in Central and South America, but just here in the case of the United States, really moving to the forefront of politics by the 1890s. It's these two factions, these two groups, workers, factory workers on one hand, or farmers on the other, that are going to be opposed to big business interests that were, just quite lucrative by during this Gilded Age, which we'll learn more about in the PBS video. The Populist Party, this People's Party, is going to establish ideas that entered into the political landscape. And this is kind of a key concept to understand here, is that in our contemporary life, we often have this knock against, well, it's a two-party system, and there's no real opportunity for third parties to have any type of leverage. If you take a close look at the Populist Party in the 1890s, you'll see that they didn't win and weren't ascendant to the highest levels, you might say, of the federal government, but they did occupy ranks and um, in positions and um, offices in local and state governments, and they also brought into the national discussion concepts that were embraced and basically found a place within the two-party system that kind of dominates the national political landscape in the United States. Concepts like the referendum, the recall, public ownership of utilities, trends towards more direct democracy. Okay, all of these things were platforms or planks within the platform of the People's Party in the 1890s. Now, these were not enacted immediately, but what happens is that the electorate and the parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the two dominant political parties, absorb these kinds of ideas into their own party platform, and they actually come into existence, and are part of our political system today, our democratic republic. The referendum, where virtually anybody, citizen or what have you, can begin to propose pieces of legislation, of public policy, and then you get that put on a ballot. You have to get a certain, obviously, number of signatures, show a certain amount of support, public support, and then you can have that be put on a ballot for the general public to vote up or down. The recall, that you can have people put into office and then have them recalled from office if they are not operating in the public interest. Um, so these are kind of clear examples of where more political power is being more accessible, essentially. As far as economic development is concerned, you have, almost at the dawn of the 19th century in 1804, the purchase of the Louisiana Territory by the United States from France, from Napoleon. This makes it so that the Mississippi River goes from being an international border between the United States and what was Spain, that Spain handed over to France and France sold to the United States. The river itself goes from being an international border to being the major infrastructural artery of the entire country. It made it so that with limited infrastructure as far as in 1804, as far as rail and roads were concerned, well, now you had this natural waterway where it was actually quicker to get goods from Pittsburgh to New Orleans than it was to get goods from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. So, because the roads, the infrastructure going from west to east was that bad, so if you move goods by water, you can get them to market to a major port, the port of New Orleans, much more quickly and efficiently. So it opens up the interior of the continent to agricultural development also. It also is going to perpetuate the intense and pretty heated debate over slavery, the issue of slavery in the United States. That the institution itself, the institution of slavery, is going to begin to migrate westward. The fervor for popular settlement and westward expansion is going to be fed not only by the doubling of the size of the United States as a result of the purchase of this land, this territory, which was, again, roughly 828,000 square miles of land. It was basically the middle third of what we know as the United States today. It's purchased for $15 million. So it's pennies on the acre, essentially. The Lewis and Clark expedition that was set out to explore exactly what the U.S. government bought for itself is going to, describe the flora and fauna, the inhabitants of this expansive territory, and also kind of feed into the imaginations of Americans, looking for a better life. I mean, looking for, making their own way, in bettering themselves, essentially. With the advent of the War of 1812, in which the United States finds itself at war with Britain, uh, this is going to the the course of this war is one where the United States feels threatened or feels that its sovereignty is being ignored by Britain. Again, there were British forts that were occupied by British troops within the borders of what was believed or proclaimed to be the United States. This couldn't be sustained, and so the outcome of this war by 1815, the United States emerges with a heightened sense of nationalism and self-confidence, and it also removes any threats of British interference. It also was a period of time when the United States was really had very tense and volatile kinds of relations with Canadians, and it's after this war and kind of moving forward throughout and into the 20th century where those um, uh, that sense of animosity begins to dwindle, especially as the northern border, the northern border of the United States, is set and clarified. So, making it the longest undefended border in the world today. To the south, and really for the whole Western Hemisphere, I should say, uh, the Monroe Doctrine, set up by the Secretary of State during the James Monroe's administration, is going to um, decree in 1823 that the U.S. government had this self-proclaimed right to oversee the affairs of uh, any and all matters within the entirety of the Western Hemisphere. That this fell within the United States' sphere of influence, and that European powers were not to interfere in matters of the Americas moving forward. Now, in 1823, the United States had no real way of enforcing this doctrine, but it was a kind of a watershed moment in that the United States was drawing a line essentially to say, hey, this is what this is our trajectory. This is what we have, kind of laid out for the future here, and we're just putting you all on notice as far as what you can expect from the United States. Um, this is combined, all of this that's beginning to happen in these early decades of the 19th century is going to help culminate in the idea of manifest destiny by the 1840s, really. That Americans essentially are seeing themselves as kind of a divinely inspired people that were charged with bringing civilization to the continent. Um, that there was a complete, it's kind of assumed within that kind of, um, kind of arrogant statement that there's this complete disregard for Native American populations and their cultures as they existed. That in many cases, these populations would have to be assimilated into the American way of life and westernized. Westernized, yeah. This idea of manifest destiny also contributes to and feeds off of, and they feed off of each other really, this idea of the self-made man type of philosophy that was dominant and just was the defining characteristic in American society during this period of time. during again as early as the 1820s and 1830s. Uh, this was best is best seen and reflected in this era, which is often referred to as the Jacksonian democracy, the era of Jacksonian democracy. This is named after President Andrew Jackson, who was he was a well-to-do plantation owner from Tennessee. He was, became president of the United States, but really he was a champion of the common man. That he had come from, poverty as a child in North Carolina. He went into the military, rose up through the ranks, became a general. Uh, Commanded the troops to victory at the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, and was the embodiment of what one's potential could achieve in the United States. In many respects, that's a kind of an idea that many adhere to, even in our own day here in the 21st century. What you're going to see in just a moment here is that how this is going to begin to um, kind of pay itself forward as we talk about women's rights and emancipation and moving towards a more free society. Before doing that, I want to talk just briefly about industrialization in the Americas in the 19th century, specifically the early 19th century. Um, the United States was in some respects, a beneficiary of industrial espionage, specifically in steam technology, which was used to power boats and shipping, the creation of steamboats. This was crucial for industrialization in specifically the kind of middle area, the Mississippi Valley, and because with regard to the Mississippi River, it made the river itself navigable now in both directions, which was not allowed or not possible prior to steam technology. That basically ships could and barges could move in one direction, but they could not go back north against the current. It was too strong or inefficient to really do that. It just took an enormous amount of labor, and resources. There's also the growth of railroads in the 1830s. You're talking about a country that possesses about 100 miles of railroads. Just 30 years later, by 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, there are about 27,000 miles of railroad track. 22,000 of that total were track that existed in northern states, which shows you where most of the industrialization is taking place as far as regions within the United States itself. It's going to be a major factor in why why the northern states were successful in crushing the Confederacy during the Civil War. The U.S. also, in the early decades, specifically the 1840s of the 19th century, became a magnet for immigrants. It was seen again here as a land of possibility. There were numerous opportunities for work, for personal advancement, again, kind of feeding into that idea of the self-made man philosophy. And early in the 19th century, immigrants were mostly coming from northwestern Europe, areas like not only the United States, or Britain and Scotland, Ireland, which had suffered a major famine in 1848. By the late 19th century, immigration was still going strong, but most of the populations are coming from southeastern Europe, places like uh, uh, Italy, Greece, the Slavic countries, and also immigrants were coming over from places like China as well, from the Far East. What's interesting here is that as far as immigration was concerned, and we're going to see this kind of again moving forward, is that it was emblematic of this period of world history in which there were these large shifts in the world's populations. That you have uh, people moving around the world, and it shows you that the world, as a result, is one, becoming more connected, just as far as ease of movement is concerned, but two, it's also becoming more interactive as far as what is happening, as far as world events are concerned, and what is world history as far as uh, shared experiences are concerned as well. We're going to begin to focus on large kind of shared experiences. World wars is probably one of the best examples. Uh, Worldwide pandemic disease, in the case of the Spanish flu, is another good example. Economic collapse, as we've seen with the case of the Great Depression in the 1930s, is another perfect example. The Cold War is another example. That these are going to be kind of these circumstances, these events that have a global kind of impact, and so we'll be studying in the coming weeks where these various populations around the world are all kind of responding to these broad kinds of events. With regard to the United States specifically, to kind of return to our focus here, after the Civil War and the period of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877, America is going to enter into its Gilded Age, beginning in 1877 and moving through to basically the year 1900. It's going to see what's known as a second industrial revolution. This is where you have the rise of elite industrialists, this ultra rich kind of class comes into existence largely as a result of being the beneficiaries of heavy industry. Um, Again, it's this PBS series, the American Experience, which devotes an hour and a half to this era, which I really think does a nice job. So, just kind of break up these lectures a bit and have you have a different perspective, or give a different perspective. Like I said, I'll be posting that. So I'll leave that segment largely to that documentary. With regard to slavery and the Civil War, of course, this had been an issue since the founding of the country. The Constitution, when it was being drafted and ratified, introduced what's known as the Three-Fifths Clause, where slaves counted as three-fifths of a person towards a state's population. Um, and that the term slave never appears in the Constitution of itself, not until the 13th Amendment, but the this three-fifths rule is directly related to um, populations that included slaves. So this is going to help, this idea, this three-fifths rule is going to help boost the slave states' representation in Congress, is what it does. And so, which was, pretty hotly debated, specifically, between with Northerners, saying, look, basically you're saying on the one hand that slaves are not, they don't have any rights unto themselves, and yet you want to politically be benefited off of them counting into your overall population towards representation in Congress. This is, that kind of double standard is, just it rubbed a lot of Northerners, or I should say, Northerners that were embracing emancipation, in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, rubbed them the wrong way, obviously. As the country is going to expand westward, the expansion of slavery itself became an increasingly contentious issue. There was this effort, a very concerted effort, to maintain an equilibrium between free and slave states. There were also a number of political compromises that tried earnestly to maintain this equilibrium. We're talking about the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which reserved a majority of the Louisiana Territory for free states. That basically slavery could not move north of the 3630 line, parallel in the geography, basically the southern border of what is today Missouri. Couldn't move more north of that line in the Louisiana Territory. You have the Compromise of 1850, where issues like popular sovereignty are moving into the forefront of the political discussion, where allowed or would potentially allow settlers in territories to decide on being admitted as free or slave states. It outlawed the Compromise of 1850 is also going to outlaw slavery in the District of Columbia. And it's also going to substantially strengthen the fugitive slave law to the point where those slavers that were moving into northern states to retrieve escaped slaves had a high, basically carte blanche to return slaves to southern states, and without and the legal loopholes were severely cut as far as recourse for slaves to kind of either stay free or make it so that they could either continue to move northward, even into Canada, to kind of maintain their freedom. So this is going to again kind of just frustrate those focusing more intensely by 1850, much more intensely on emancipation and the manumission of movements that were spreading across, again, mostly northern states. There were some in the south, but mostly in the north. By 1854, you have the enactment of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is where popular sovereignty would be applied to territories within the Louisiana Territory. And these two territories were north now of the original line established as a result of the Missouri Compromise. So what you see here are these compromises had a shorter and shorter shelf life. That compromises are becoming more and more patchwork, and they're lasting for shorter and shorter periods of time, showing the frustration of the politicians and the public sentiment. But also, you can see that these compromises are beginning to just completely undercut one another, and kind of so that compromise here is becoming more and more difficult to achieve and sustain. It's a sign, essentially, of the untenable nature of the dichotomy of American life. This idea of being either, you know, focusing on maintaining the status quo of slavery as an institution within the United States, or whether there's a need for kind of a reinvention of American society, realignment in which there was a free society for all. This is, kind of reminiscent of Abraham Lincoln's House Divided type of kind of concept. So you have, and this is also seen in American politics, where in the South you see Southern politicians beginning to emphasize a Southern mentality, Southern nationalism is going to move to the forefront of, kind of the Southern political mindset. Also, or as opposed to that, you have the emergence of the Free Soil Party, which will basically, as a plank in its political platform, called for a full stop to slavery's expansion, that it just would not be tolerated. And those free soilers, as they were known, the supporters of this party, political party, were just frustrated to the extent of there would be no more compromise with any type of arrangements for slavery and its expansion. Abraham Lincoln was a member of the Free Soil Party before joining the Republican Party. Also, you see here in events like the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, an alignment beginning to emerge between different factions that were calling for social empowerment, liberation, specifically with regard to things like emancipation, the end of slavery, and also the advancement of women's rights. So you see here the broadening of the concept of the self-made man philosophy. That's not just going to be, white males that are going to benefit from these ideas of opportunity, of personal advancement. That this is going to be a concept that should be, in the eyes of leading individuals and kind of individuals or intellectuals at the forefront of social movements, to say, no, this is something that the United States has stood for and really should stand for moving forward. And that gets us to the Civil War itself, from 1861 to 1865. The two main turning points in this war are on the battlefield are the Battle of Antietam in 1862, in which foreign powers rejected recognition of the Confederate States of America and its claims of independence. Also, Lincoln is going to use this stalemate, this draw in this battle, kind of indecisive Union victory, you might say, so Lincoln is going to use it as an opportunity to issue his Emancipation Proclamation, making the abolition of slavery a war aim for the U.S. federal government and the Union forces. Just the very next year, in 1863, you have the battles of Vicksburg and Gettysburg, that are going to help turn the tide as far as domestic mindset is concerned. With regard specifically to the Battle of Gettysburg, this is a decisive victory for the Union forces. It was essentially a defeat for the Confederate forces that they simply could not afford, and it would be the Confederacy's farthest penetration north into the north, into what is today Pennsylvania. Uh, but uh, it really, after this July 1863, it is going to, the handwriting really is on the wall as far as the South, and its prospects for any type of victory were pretty much doomed. From 1865 to 1877, this marks the period of Reconstruction in American history as far as kind of what to do with having the South readmitted, Southern states readmitted back into the Union. Um, the President Lincoln has a very lenient type of policy that he will hope to enact. Um, his assassination, however, the first president in American history that was assassinated, meant that more radical Republicans, radical members of Lincoln's own party, were going to set the agenda for post-war America. This was there was a more a higher threshold, you might say, more punitive type of threshold for Southern states to be readmitted into the Union. Uh, and it's also a period of time when you see the United States make these very um, uh, substantial kind of advancements in kind of promoting federal authority, uh, in following through on the war aims, on the ideas that were, you know, served as the backbone for the North in carrying out the war itself. So in 1865, you have the 13th Amendment being added to the Constitution, which abolished slavery. And the 14th Amendment follows in 1868, defining terms of citizenship. And the 15th Amendment in 1870 extended suffrage, basically the right to vote, to African Americans. Again, African American males. The period of Reconstruction is going to end with the Compromise of 1877. There was the presidential election was disputed. Basically, there was came down to a number of states, two states in particular. The results were extremely close, and so the Republicans and Democrats got together and hashed out this compromise known as the Compromise of 1877. As a result of this compromise, the Republican candidate won the presidency, but federal troops were withdrawn from southern states, allowing southern whites to reverse gains that African Americans had enjoyed in southern states. And so southern whites were allowed to enact what came to be known as Jim Crow laws, where they disenfranchised black voters. They enforced laws of discrimination in against African Americans, and also began to segregate facilities along racial lines as well. Again, the Gilded Age, I'll leave that to the PBS American Experience. That was followed from 1877 to 1896. This is an excellent resource, so please do check it out. Um, and this gets us to basically reflecting on what we've covered here. That these independence movements in Central and South America, as discussed in part one, were very successful, but they conveyed the complexities that really faced these new states, these new countries, this constitutional versus autocratic type of expressions of power. Again, something we've seen in Europe. just spent hours talking about the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era there, and here it is, across the Atlantic, and there's similar frictions, similar types of issues that are easily parallel the experiences in um, Europe. There are also ethnic differences between kind of these different groups: Amerindians, Creoles, you know those are mixed race and what have you. Again, your textbook does a very good job of laying that out and detailing it, and also discussing it in greater detail. You know, there's also social concerns between farmers and aristocrats. There's going to be also a difference as far as economic development is concerned. With regard to the developments in the United States, we see intensification focusing on westward expansion. Uh, this is also going to spread concerns over the expansion of slavery, as we discussed, which is going to culminate in the Civil War as really the defining event of the 19th century in American history. In the late 19th century, you see a shift here from Reconstruction to an intensification of industrialization and a refocusing of public attention in that direction. This second industrial revolution is going to lead to new social tensions. This alliance of farmers and laborers against big business owners. And by 1898, you're going to see with the advent of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. is going to look to take advantage of Spanish collapse, continued collapse in the Western Hemisphere, and be able to follow through in action, in fact, really, with the Monroe Doctrine, that the United States is going to say, look, we're going to take control of these areas of the Caribbean. It's going to establish the United States as a world power, not only with seizing the likes of Puerto Rico and the Philippines, which was essentially half a world away in the Pacific, but also the United States' ability to exert considerable influence over Cuba as well. And this all is occurring at the dawn here of the 20th century. So this gets us to the end of these summary of events in the 19th century with regard to the Americas. I know it's covering a lot of ground, but moving forward, we'll do the same thing for Europe and its interaction with various other parts of the world, specifically Africa and the Far East, China in particular. So be looking forward to looking out for that lecture coming up. All right, take care.